This video is about mediation and moderation, in other words, conditional effect models. If you have a look at the papers published years ago in your field, you see that, explanatory studies, they usually started asking simple questions like, does X predict Y, or does X cause Y, or basically, is there any relationship between X and Y? So for years they were asking, relationship questions. Does X, is X related to Y? Does X predict Y? And many studies have been conducted to test the relationship between two variables, but later researchers wanted to know more about this relationship. For example, maybe in a field, many studies have been conducted on the relationship between, let's say, service quality and customer satisfaction, right? You can find many of them published years ago. But now researchers want to know more about this relationship. In other words, they want to know how this relationship exists, why we have this relationship, or when, or for whom, or under which condition there is a relationship between X and Y. In other words, we want to know the mechanism behind this relationship. Right. So already it is established in the field that there is a relationship between X and Y, let's say, and or at least it has been tested. So now they want to know why X leads to Y. Why X, an independent variable leads to the dependent variable. Why such a relationship exists. So these questions are about mediation and moderation. So mediators usually address how and why research questions. You may say, okay, how and why are more related to qualitative studies. I totally understand what you mean, but you can ask these questions when you want to test mediation as well. They are basically, the nature of the questions is how this relationship exists, and you may test the mediators. So when we talk about mediation, we are addressing how and why research question means how or why X is related to Y, or X causes Y. And for moderators, we are addressing when, for whom, under which condition X causes Y. For example, there is a relationship. For example, we have been testing the relationship between X and Y for years. Now we want to know for whom this relationship is stronger, or for whom this relationship is weaker, or maybe for whom there is such a relationship, right? Or we would ask, under which condition we have a relationship between X and Y. And these questions, these research questions, are about moderators. Let me give you a simple example. Look at this model. So assume that this model has been tested already in the field. And as you can see, it's a very simple model. It's the relationship between watching TV and achievement level. And you see there is a single-headed arrow. This means that we assume that there is a cause and effect between watching TV and achievement level. In other words, the hypothesis, as you can see, is perhaps kids who spend more time on watching TV, their performance, or let's say measured by their CGPA or their marks in the test, is lower. So there is a negative relationship between watching TV and achievement level in the school. So suppose this has been tested already for years, and now researchers want to know more about this relationship. In other words, why this relationship, why watching TV has a negative impact on students or kids' achievement level in the school. So what researchers may do is to add a mediator between these two variables. And the mediator I suggest here is time spent on homework. In other words, watching, as you can see here, those who spend more time on watching TV, as a result, they spend less time on their homework. As a result, they won't do well in the exam. So the first variable explains the second one, and then this explains the third one. This means watching TV leads to results in less time spent on homework, and then as a result, student won't do well in the final exam. So a mediator explains the relationship between IV and DV. So this is a technical term that you can use in your report. A mediator tests, the mediator explains the relationship between X and Y. And now we know why more watching TV leads to less achievement level, because students spend less time on their homework, and this is a mediation. So for mediation, this leads to this, and then this leads to this. And then what about for the moderation? Okay, ignore the this variable, extent to which performance is rewarded. So suppose that for years researchers have tested the relationship between performance and satisfaction. This means perhaps their hypothesis can be higher performance means higher work satisfaction, right? So those who are performing well in the organization, they as a result will be more satisfied with their work, let's say, right? So researchers have been tested the relationship between these blue variables, right, for years. Now they want to know more about the mechanism behind this relationship. They want to know under which condition this relationship is stronger and under which condition it is weaker. And here we introduce a moderator, right? You know, sometimes, for example, for years, you see that you review the literature and you notice that some studies have found a positive relationship between two variables, some have found a negative relationship, some could not find any relationship. This is one of the cases that you can introduce a moderator. You would say, it seems the relationship between these two variables depends on another factor or another variable. So there is another variable that impacts the relationship between these two variables, right? So sometimes it's stronger, sometimes it's weaker, sometimes no relationship, sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's positive. So it depends on a third variable, right? And this third variable is a moderator. So a moderator is a variable that impacts the direction or strength of the relationship between two variables. And yeah, basically it's an interaction. I will explain more about it later. But here, look at this. Performance and satisfaction. Suppose that over years researchers have just tested the relationship between these two variables, and they found out that sometimes it's positive, sometimes negative, sometimes no relationship. Now they want to know under which condition there is positive or there is a negative relationship. So they introduce, let's say, extent to which performance is rewarded. It means the relationship between performance and satisfaction depends on this variable, means depends on to what extent performance is rewarded in your organization. Let me give you an example. In some organizations, for example, in my organization, when I do well, then my boss actually recognizes my performance and then reward me. They reward me, right? So the organization will reward me for my high performance. As a result, I'm very happy, I'm satisfied, more satisfied about my job. So when the organization rewards performance, then there will be a positive relationship between performance and satisfaction. Means more performance, more satisfaction. But in some organizations, they don't care what you are doing. So you do a lot and they don't reward you or they don't recognize your effort. So you won't be happy. So in this case, higher performance means more dissatisfaction, means less satisfaction, right? So higher performance, less satisfaction when your boss doesn't care, doesn't really recognize what you are doing, doesn't reward you for what you have done this year, right? So then you feel demotivated and then let's say you will be less satisfied, right? So the relationship between these two variables depend on this third variable, which is a moderator, right? So the moderator, as you can see, it's there is an arrow that goes to the relationship between these two variables. So it's different from mediation. In mediation, you see this goes to this, then this goes to this. So this sits between the two variables. But here, this is outside, and the arrow does not go directly to the variable. It goes to, the way we show it, it impacts the relationship between two variables. Let me give you a few simple examples, everyday examples, to hopefully fully understand what we mean by mediation. There are some examples here. Let me just use some of them. Okay, suppose that the relationship, so ignore the mediator column. Now, look at the IV and DV, means independent variable and dependent variable. Suppose that research has shown that higher education means, let's say, renting or buying more expensive house, staying in a more expensive house. So based on your observation or based on your research, you notice that there is a positive relationship between education level and the price of house that people buy or rent. Now, we want to know why there is such a relationship, right? And then you introduce a mediator, better paying job. This means those with higher education, they will have higher income. As a result, they can buy or rent a higher, more expensive house. So better paying job, the salary or income, explains the relationship between education and the price of your house. So education leads or impacts the income, and income impacts the price of the house that you rent or buy. Another example is brushing teeth and partner more willing to kiss. Okay, there is a positive relationship between brushing teeth. Means those who brush their teeth, they have higher chance to be kissed by their partners. So brush your teeth, you have higher chance to be kissed. And then you may ask, okay, so what is special about brushing the teeth? If I brush, the days that I brush my teeth, I may be kissed by my partner, but some days that I don't brush, less chance to be kissed based on your observation or your research. The reason is perhaps because of nicer breath, because when I brush my teeth, my breath, the smell is good, maybe, and then as a result my partner is willing to kiss me. So the nicer breath, the smell of your mouth, is the mediator, tell you why there is a relationship between brushing teeth and being kissed by your partner. So there are other examples here as well. You can have a look. So what I want you to understand is the mediator explains why this relationship is here or how this relationship exists, right? So it sits between these two, between IV and DV, right? And they just give you more information about the reason of this relationship, right? And of course, there is no limit on the number of mediators you can include. So more mediators means more information about the relationship between two variables. So you can maybe later add one more mediator between nicer breath and the dependent, and then one more mediators between these two, and one. So you add more mediators means more explanation about the relationship between the two variables. And now some examples about the moderators. So the first, let's have a look at the first one. So ignore the moderator part, the column, the middle column. Just look at the IV and DV. So the relationship between chili sauce and taste. The hypothesis is there is a relationship between amount of chili sauce that you add to your food and the taste of the food. But this depends on the food type. For example, if it's ice cream and you add chili sauce, it will be disgusting most probably. I haven't tried, but I can imagine that I won't like it. So if it's ice cream and you add chili sauce, it will be disgusting, right? And however, if it's chicken, why not add more chili sauce and it will be more delicious? So it depends, the relationship between the chili sauce and taste of the food depends on the food itself. So the relationship can be positive, negative, or maybe there will be a relationship or no relationship, or it will be stronger or weaker. All depends on the food type. Another example, drinking alcohol, right? So more drinking beer or whiskey, and the relationship between drinking beer and whiskey and, let's say, social acceptance, right? So this depends on the context. If you drink, let's say, beer or whiskey in a class, right, or in a church or in workplace, this has a negative, drinking beer has a negative impact on your social acceptance if you drink it in a class or in a church or in a workplace, right? So the relationship between alcohol consumption, means drinking beer, drinking whiskey, and social acceptance is negative in workplace. It means if more drinking, less social acceptance. More drinking whiskey and beer in, let's say, a class means less social acceptance. However, in a party or in a pub, there is a positive relationship. It means that if you go to a pub and you drink beer, perhaps more social acceptance, right? So drinking, so more drinking, perhaps more social acceptance in a pub or in a party, right? So drinking alcohol depends on the context. You cannot drink it everywhere, right? I mean, this is the assumption that I understand that some of you don't drink, and it's very good. Don't drink. It's not good for your health. It's just an example to understand the moderators. So this is a moderator. This means the context determines. You know, in research, there are so many studies. For example, you may compare relationship between two variables, compare it between men and women. For example, in men, it can be positive. In women, it can be negative or even non-significant. Or you have seen, you know, some studies, they compare a model between and after an event, or maybe, you know, financial crisis 2008. There are so many studies that they have compared two models, the relationship between certain variables and company performance between the financial crisis, after the financial crisis, or during the financial crisis. So the financial crisis plays a moderator role, or gender, or, you know. So anyway, so what is important here is, you see, the moderator does not depend on IV. Moderator is an independent variable impacting the relationship between IV and DV, right? So for example, in this case, you see, food type does not depend on chili sauce, or social context does not depend on alcohol consumption. It means, it doesn't mean because you are drinking alcohol, as a result, context will change. No. You can be in a church or you can be in a workplace, right? So being in church or workplace, or in a party, this is a context, and it's independent variable, right? It's not influenced by the IV. But here for the mediators, the mediator is influenced by IV. This means IV causes mediator, and then mediators impacts DV. So IV impacts mediator, mediator impacts DV. But here moderator is independent. Moderator is not dependent on IV, right? So this is one of the main differences between mediators and moderators, and how we show mediators and moderators. So this is the way we show mediators, the conceptual diagram. When you draw it in the research model, you draw it like this. For moderators, as I said, you draw a path here that goes to another path. This means this M is impacting the relationship between X and Y. And here the statistical diagram is very similar to the one here, but here for moderators, we show it with an interaction. This means when you want to test this moderator, it's like having three independent variables. So dependent variable is Y, and then you have three independent variables. One is the independent variable X that we already have. Another one is M, and another one is the interaction of X and M. So three is like a model with one DV dependent variable and three independent variables for moderators. This is the way we test it, right? This is the way we test it. This is the way we show it in the model, but this is the way we test it in, let's say, AMOS, in SEM. So, and you should be comfortable with writing these equations. We won't use them in this course much, but later when you want to test complicated models like moderated mediation, or when you have several moderators and mediation, it's good, actually you should know how to construct, how to write the equations, and it's not difficult. For example, the equation for this model is you just write an equation for each of the endogenous variables. So we have two endogenous variables here, m and y. So you write two equations. So m is explained by x. So what is this? I is constant. Okay, it doesn't matter what it is. We just write a constant here. Plus a multiply x will give you m. A is the path coefficient. So path coefficient a multiplied by variable x will give you m. Why is e? Error term, because always there will be error. X does not explain 100% of the variance of m, so always there is an error term here. We have discussed this before a lot. So mediators is a multiply x. What is y? Y, there are two paths goes to y. So it's b multiplied by m plus c prime multiplied by x. You see here. Plus error term, of course, and a constant. What about here? There are three paths goes to y. So you just report the path and put plus between them. So y actually is a combination of all these three. So y is b2 multiply m plus b1 multiplied by x plus b3 multiplied by x and m. This is an interaction, means x multiplied by m, and plus error term. So these are the equations. And then how to test. Now, how to test mediation and moderation. There are different methods. I will discuss how to test mediation and moderation in the next videos.